Havoc Demon Hunter has had tons of fun options in its talents, tier sets, legendaries, and other borrowed power through the last few expansions. With the return of talent trees in Dragonflight, it gives the opportunity to bring some of these things back, hopefully fixing some of the issues that current Havoc DH has. In this video, I'm going to go over the top 5 things I'm hoping to see in the new talent tree system for Havoc Demon Hunter. The first of the 5 things I want on the Demon Hunter talent tree the most are going to be Sigils. For those that aren't super versed in Vengeance or Demon Hunter as a whole, Sigils are a Vengeance, so our tank spec, only mechanic. And they are ground target abilities that activate after a few seconds, which apply an effect in the area. Currently the only Sigils being Fear, a Silence, a Chain Grip, or a Damaging Dot, and this isn't counting the Kyrian Sigil, which I have no idea if that's going to come back or not. While these aren't Havoc talents at all, I think they'd be a really interesting and useful form of CC to give us on the class tree. And I've kind of thought of this a little bit because Demon Hunter, unlike the other returning specs, so not counting Evoker, only have 2 specs, where the others have 3 or 4. And this leads to a lot of gaps in my mind on the class talent tree where we can't take talents or other things from 3 specs to fill it and are only giving us 2 specs to fill it. So because of this, I think that these sigils, even if it's just the Fear Sigil or the Silence Sigil, the Chain Sigil is very strong, and that'd be very cool if they gave it to us, but I feel like that's not going to happen. These would be very useful CCs or crowd controls in scenarios where that'd be good, like in M+, or in ad-based raid fights. I think it'd be a very good form of utility for Havoc to get, and I do see them possibly being able to get this on the class talent tree, because realistically, Havoc and Vengeance, their overlap is like Immolation or a Metamorphosis. That's about it. So I could see Sigils coming into the class tree and would be a very strong and useful form of CC for Havoc to pick up. The second thing I really want to see for Havoc Demon Hunter are actual burst cooldowns. In World of Warcraft, burst is an incredibly important damage profile, and on average is much more useful than a sustained profile. Burst is better on target swapping, suffers less from downtime, and overall is just more wanted than sustain is. One of the largest issues with the current iteration of Havoc is their complete lack of burst CDs. Their damage profile is almost entirely sustained. In terms of cooldowns, Metamorphosis is really the only one we have, which sits at a 4-minute cooldown normally, the tier set from this tier not included, and leads to roughly a 10% damage increase when we use it, which is incredibly low. In terms of cooldowns, if you don't push Metamorphosis, it's only roughly like a 10% DPS loss, which is significantly lower than almost every other class in the game. Maybe Frost Mage is around there as well, but Havoc's Metamorphosis is not very impactful. However, in past expansions, Havoc themselves have had access to quite powerful cooldowns such as Chaos Blades, which is a 30% increase that also makes your autos do more and deal chaos, and Nemesis, which is a 20% increase to a single target that has some AOE applications. So I hope to see some of these cooldowns brought back, or even possibly new cooldowns to the talent tree, which will allow us to have a more burstier option and deal more damage. Metamorphosis itself can't really be tuned too much higher, because if we deal more damage in Metamorphosis, it will just make Demonic such an Eclipse auto snap pick. I expect Demonic to stick around in Dragonflight. It's been around in every single iteration of Havoc, and it's super iconic and very fun to play. So you can't really touch Metamorphosis and turn it up that high. So I think giving some of these other cooldowns or some new cooldowns could be a way of giving us more into a burstier role. And this burstier ability to do damage could lead to us being more viable in any given meta, rather than just being, oh, we need a magic debuff, Vengeance isn't that good right now, let's bring a Havoc Demon Hunter. So hopefully some form of cooldown can be brought back in. The third thing that I would like to see is some form of stat scaling. Currently in Shadowlands, Havoc's best stat is Haste, since it compresses our rotation and allows for faster GCD to spend and generate Fury, as well as a lower CD and Immolation aura, leading to higher damage from that in their Conduit and more Fury generation. However, outside of that, none of the other 3 stats interact very well with our kit, with Versatility being our second best stat. Generally with a class has Versatility as its best stat, and it's not a tank or you're not doing like PvP or high-end M+, where you need this Versatility to survive stuff, it shows that class doesn't scale very well with stats. For crit, it sometimes has been good for us. In 9.1, it was very good because of the Frost set and just how that scales off of crit. Right now, it's decent because of just all the small ticks you're doing with Brand, as well as the Trinket from Zymox, where the crit really matters with that. That's kind of the main reason. But outside of those other things that get added, there's nothing in our base kit that scales with crit at all. In fact, it's actually kind of a negative because our I-beam will always crit. So any crit stat you have scales negatively with that because it doesn't affect it, right? So you're always critting there, so any crit you do have is kind of wasted. Perhaps the more egregious and worse kind of examples is just our mastery stat. Now, our mastery stat buffs our chaos damage as well as our movement speed. Woo! But a very small part of our actual overall damage, at least right now, is chaos. The only abilities that actually do chaos damage are Annihilate, / Chaos Strike, I-Beam, and I think Fell Rush when it's empowered. There's very few abilities that actually do chaos damage. So the small buff from our mastery doesn't actually impact things that much. So you never build mastery at all. You just completely, no mastery is the best. I guess like a little tiny bit is probably fine, but you want as little mastery as you can because there's like haste is just better and then versatility is just better. So one of our stats being completely useless is very bad. One of our stats not scaling with our kit at all is very bad. So hopefully there's some kind of ability that get introduced to kind of alleviate this and help us out a little bit. I actually think Chaos Blades might help us a little bit because it makes your auto attacks do more chaos damage, which would get scaled with your mastery within that window. So perhaps there's something they can put in a tree to make our mastery useful, to make crit scale with us. But currently, versatility is one of our best stats, which means that we don't scale with stats very well at all, kind of the same vein as Windwalker Monk. So I'm hoping for some kind of change with that to kind of give us that stat scaling power towards later parts of the expansion. The fourth, and perhaps one of the largest things, is some form of AOE rework / fix to Blade Dance. Currently, Havoc's AOE is incredibly weak outside of being able to meta and apply brand to a large amount of targets. Outside of those scenarios, there are tank specs that even out DPS has, which is kind of crazy. As a button, Blade Dance is supposed to be our dedicated AOE button, but currently it isn't really being pressed, being eclipsed by the Cycle of Hatred build to get more I-beams. Because of this, we aren't taking First Blood, which means that Blade Dance deals a lot less damage and costs a lot more Fury to spend. It's just too costly. In terms of power, Blade Dance itself to be pressed more often needs both the Dancing with Fate Conduit buff, which is a large buff to Blade Dance's damage, as well as the cooldown, the cost reduction of First Blood and the prio damage portion of that. The third problem with Blade Dance is the fact that it has a cooldown, and the cooldown is actually fairly significant. So because of this cooldown, you can't just spam Blade Dance in AoE. It leads to scenarios where you push Blade Dance and then have a few seconds, depending on your haste, but generally more than 3 to 4 seconds, of not being able to spend your Fury on any AoE buttons, leading to Chaos Striking or I-beaming, which technically does AoE, but I'll touch on that in a second, in AoE, which leads to kind of a very bad feeling. On the topic of I-beam, it is still currently capped at 1 target and then doing square root damage after that, which leads to its overall damage in AoE scenarios being very low. In fact, if you hit, I believe, 17 targets right now, it'll do the same damage as if they uncapped it to 5. So it's kind of ridiculous to how little damage I-beam actually does to things. So I believe that bumping its cap up to maybe 3 to 5 targets before the square root comes in will go a long way to making, that Havoc Demon Hunter damage a little bit more viable. We have other options and talents and small other buttons in terms of AoE, with Glaive Tempest, Immolation Aura, and the buff Fell Rush all giving us some form of AoE. However, these also have cooldowns, leaving us with that issue of having no dedicated Fury Spender for AoE when we need it or when we want it. Giving Havoc some form of no cooldown spender, uncapping I-beam, or buffing Blade Dance to make it more worthwhile to press would go a long way making us more viable for AoE. For the last portion of this video, I want to list some super cool abilities from Havoc's past that I hope make a return to the talent trees. The first of these is Bloodlet, a fan favorite talent from Legion. Bloodlet causes your throw glaive to leave a dot on the target, with each successive application of the dot extending its duration, almost like how Ignite works for Fire Mages or Devouring Plague works for Shadow Priests. This talent is super cool and was loved back in Legion, giving us a throw glaive into our rotation while also allowing us to do some damage in AoE. This can provide some rotational complexity to Havoc, which admittedly is a class that doesn't have a lot. Another talent from Legion that was super cool in my opinion was Chaos Cleave, which causes your Chaos Strike or Annihilation to cleave to nearby targets. I think this talent in concept is super cool. I never played with it as much back in Legion. I didn't really play as much back then. But I think it sounds super cool and could also help to maybe alleviate some of those AoE issues that I was mentioning earlier in the video. I think the 2-piece from Nighthold is also a super cool sleeper pick. to come into a talent, maybe being in the class tree. It's very simple. All it does is increase the Fury generation of our abilities, but this is very strong. Fury generation increases have always been strong damage increases for Havoc, meaning we get to push less Demon's Bite and more Chaos Strike, or more I-Beam, or whatever. So these Fury generational increases are super cool, and I think could have a chance of coming back. There are also some cool legendaries, so Legion legendaries, that I hope are implemented in some way. Anger of the Half Giants is also another Fury generational increase on Demon's Bite, which was good back then, and I could see being included and good now. You know, more Fury means more abilities, which is always fun. And Radon's Cascading Eyes, which causes your critical hits from I-Beam, which is every hit, to reduce its cooldown by a certain amount. I could see this coming back. It's a fan favorite and could lead to some more I-Beam shenanigans in AoE. Perhaps with the Anguished ability that was on the Legion artifact weapon, could lead to some big damage if you I-Beam enough. Anguish leaves a dot, which does a certain percentage on the target whenever it expires, depending on how many stacks you have. It's not a dot, but that's basically what it does. Finally, my 100% pick, I'm almost guaranteed this is going to show up on the talent tree somewhere, is some form of effect that increases our haste by some amount whenever I-Beam is finished fully channeling. This has been around forever. It was our tier set in Taurus. It was our strongest Azerite trait in BFA. And it's now a passive baked into our class in Shadowlands. So I believe this will come back in some way, shape, or form. And I think it'll be very strong. It's been a part for forever. So those are my top 5 wishes for inclusions into the talent trees for Havoc Demon Hunter for next expansion. Overall, Havoc has some interesting and exciting options for Blizzard to give us from its past in the talent tree, and I'm overall super excited to see where they go with it. I think there's a lot of opportunity for some cool things to be included. I think there's lots of opportunity for some new and interesting builds to be discovered. I think there's also hopefully some room for new talents to come, especially since Havoc hasn't been around for a lot of other around as long as other classes have. So that's it for today. I really want to appreciate everybody for watching. This is my first video in a while. I'm trying to get back into the swing of things. I took a long break. So I really appreciate it if you liked the video, if you enjoyed it, subscribe, and comment down below if you agree with my picks or what else you'd like to see from Havoc Demon Hunter in Dragonflight. As more Dragonflight stuff comes out, I'll be covering it. I'll be doing some more guides for Season 4, which was recently announced to be coming out soon. So thanks for sticking around, everybody, and have a good one.